Thank you for joining in, listening in. My name is Arun, and you are with the AI with Arun show. So, in today's session, we have the distinguished pleasure of hosting Arjun Malhotra, sir, who is a true pioneer in the Indian IT landscape. He is the co-founder of HCL, one of India's leading IT companies. Arjun has played a pivotal role in shaping the tech industry over the past 4 decades. With a wealth of experience in entrepreneurship and innovation, he has also founded and advised numerous startups, particularly in the fields of healthcare and education, which are deeply impacted by AI. He was awarded the Albert Einstein Technology Medal in the year 2001, 23 years ago. He was also named as an eminent engineering personality by the Institution of Engineers in India. Arjun sir also serves on the board of several educational institutions and very prestigious ones at that, like IIT Kharagpur, IIM Shillong, and many others. His insights into the current state and future of technology are invaluable, and we are so thrilled to have him here on the AI with Arun show to share his thoughts on the evolving tech landscape in India and beyond. Please join me in welcoming Arjun Malhotra, sir. Sir, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for that very kind introduction.
Of course. Sir, so let's get started. So as the pioneer of the Indian IT industry, how do you view the current state of technology entrepreneurship in India?
Oh, I think it has changed dramatically. When we started way back in 1975, the word entrepreneur didn't exist in our vocabulary. You were either a businessman or you had a job. You were employed by a company. That's how life was in those days. It has changed completely. I see kids out of college. IITs now give them a year's sabbatical to go pursue their entrepreneurial dreams and come back and complete the degree if they want. Every IIT, every IIM, the government's encouraging entrepreneurship. All of them have a setup where they incubate companies. We are seeing some professors get involved, very much like it is here. It'll take a little time to change, but it's starting to happen. And yes, I think it's quite amazing entrepreneurship in India because how should I put it? The Prime Minister himself is clear that if he has to meet his goal of multi-trillion-dollar economy by a certain date, he has to have 1 million startups. And Invest India today talks about 75,000 startups that they have, that they know of. So it is changing completely. I think what we've been able to do, what the IT industry has been able to do, is sort of break the glass ceiling for the middle class. When I graduated, security was the important thing. My parents were very clear. They said, as long as I'm studying, they'll support me. After that, I have to stand on my own feet economically. Today, that's not true. A lot of people are willing to take risks and bets on what they believe could change the world, in some ways.
Right. So, sir, you have been involved in several, startup ecosystems, right? Early series, people who are just founding companies, venture capital. How are you seeing the developments in India and the US? What kind of differences, what kind of similarities are you seeing? And you clearly said that in India, the glass ceiling is broken now, especially for middle class people. But what are the other similarities and differences you see in terms of infrastructure, funds availability, overall mentorship for these entrepreneurs?
So there are two parts to it. One is, what is the infrastructure for entrepreneurs? And I think the funds part is all available there. You got VCs, you got angels, you got, Ps, everything is available. What is not available is the sophisticated legal system behind it. For example, Class B share here can have 4 votes, right? In India, every share has 1 vote. So there are some of those things that need to evolve. Also, the way the government is taxing startups is different to the way they are taxed here. There's some level of encouragement, but there's some level of discouragement because to some extent that old socialist mindset at the political level still exists. And, a large part of their voter base is low-income people, and so they have to cater to that to some extent, and that hurts entrepreneurship and people who are starting to make successful companies and make a fair amount of wealth. I think the other and more important thing is the cultural difference. Even today, a lot of the founders in India are talking about wanting to own 50+% of the company. It's like my company. It's a classic difference between how people see it here, where company is seen as a means to either get power or wealth or combination of both. In India, I mean, it is changing. I've got to say that, but a lot of the early entrepreneurs and the other thing, and that's true here and there, is a lot of them don't scale. They want to know everything that's going on in the company. They want to control every decision. You can't scale a company that way. You have to delegate. You have to set up an organization. And so that's the way. I think those are the differences. They are merging. At some point, people are seeing that. They're seeing what it is. Some of the younger people, the new generation, is probably much more amenable to looking at things differently. But yeah, those are the differences I've seen over time.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting way of summarizing it, sir. What you said is there is a cultural nuance of how we treat businesses, how we look at businesses from the Indian lens versus how we look at it in the US. And there's also tax and regulatory aspects, how the government taxes or not taxes or taxes differently. So those are very interesting nuances. And I'm sure a lot of people are listening in, including policyholders who watch our channel AI with Arun Show, they'll be encouraged to look at things differently. So thank you for bringing that up. So, sir, talking about AI, AI adoption has just exponentially gone up in the, let's say, last 5 years, and more so open with ChatGPT coming in about 2 years ago. And there are a lot of industries that are impacted very differently, right? So in particular, given your involvement with the education sector, with the finance sector, how are you seeing AI adoption in these sectors and a few others where you're actively involved, both in the US and in India?
So AI, I don't know if you remember the bubble in 1999 and 2000. So everyone thought brick and mortar would close down and everything will become e-commerce, right? It created a lot of uncertainty in the minds of CXOs of large companies, partly because they didn't understand the concept of e-commerce, and partly because they didn't know what was going to happen. In that, that was also a technology kind of revolution at that time. You remember all the stuff that happened. I think AI is somewhat similar. You have a lot of senior people in companies don't really know the impact. It is a technology. Everyone says it's going to change the world. It probably is, but it's not going to change it overnight. I think AI will make a big difference, but you have to find solutions. I think what ChatGPT did was it made a B2C kind of product. My wife uses it to draft her emails, stuff like that, and to draft letters that she needs to send out officially or whatever. So that's why the hype, to a large extent. It's not just companies; it's also consumers or individuals. But I think ultimately it's going to be solution based. You have to find solutions from the technology, or the technology has to create solutions. NVIDIA has an amazing, their strategy is they don't sell just chips, but they give you a toolkit for a particular vertical. And that really is their big differentiator. It also points to why they are valued so highly. I think that is going to happen. In India, fortunately, we have a lot of kids being trained on AI. There is a lot of good training and there's a lot of not so good training, if I use that term. In fact, we used to have a debate topic when I was in college saying you get a certificate or a degree but no education. In fact, way back in 1980, we decided to start an IIT because we needed programmers to operate our computers. Otherwise, our computer sales would have suffered. And people were giving certificates, but they were not training people. And so we thought if we do proper training of programmers, make it a commercial organization, we'll be able to get them to man our computers. They'll get jobs, So it was a good model. And IT did really well. Still there, still doing well. That I think is going to happen with AI. So yeah, in fact, I was reading a news item in one of the Indian newspapers a few days ago, and they're talking about setting up an AI ministry. That's how important it is. And I agree with that, but you have to define what the ministry is going to do. If it starts regulating AI just because it's there, that would become a problem.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
sorry, I just wanted to mention one more thing. I think ethics in AI is also very important because you can use it, and I don't think we have a framework for it. I've been working with some mathematicians in Europe, scientific mathematicians, if I use that term, and we are trying to see if we can get a framework together. How should I put it? So ethics is a very personal thing. It's also a company decision. And so if you're working in a company, you've got to put the company format in that framework, and you've got to put your format. Hopefully there's no mismatch. It's probably enhances what the company's format is. And then every time you use an AI platform to take out something, if you run it through that format, it will tell you what the differences are between what you've asked it to check and what your output is giving you. And you can then decide whether it's acceptable or what you want to do. I think that's one. The other thing I worry about is when I use a platform, AI platform, the bias of the programmer is built into the platform. And if I use it without knowing what the bias is, that bias will come into my output. And so there are lots of nuances, there are lots of issues like that you've got to worry about when you start looking at doing serious work or with AI. Writing emails and drafting letters, that's okay in a way.
Yeah, that is just barely level zero of the value chain. But sir, to your point, ethics, and in particular, we are here seeing a lot of synthetic data being used, all right, especially when there is no access or limited access to data for training all these models. People are using synthetic data, but the data is based upon data. And to your point, the developers' biases come in. So how do you think all of this is impacting, especially synthetic data, developer bias, and how should organizations think about ethics so that at the end of the day, the outcome is not truly, tilted one way or the other?
Yeah, I think we'll have to wait for some technology tools or technological tools that come up and help us in this area. I don't expect people in companies to be able to go through this themselves. They need some help. And we hopefully over a period of time, we will get tools that will help us look at this. The governments are talking about regulations. Some of that might help if they're done properly. But yeah, it has to be a technological solution to something like this. Some kind of algorithm framework. Don't have the answers right now. I presume people are working on it. I think I know some people who are. When they come up with at least an alpha version, we'll get an idea of how people are thinking of controlling this, so to say. Wrong word, control, but yeah.
Yeah, and so just curious. So, do you think it's the government's role to sort of create that framework, help create the framework, and not just one government, but something like United Nations, right? The United Nations have an AI charter, or do you think it's the role of public companies, private companies, or just simple entrepreneurs to come up with a framework like that? Whose role is it truly to create that framework where ethics is truly practiced in the AI world?
Ideally, it would be self-regulatory. If we can get a body to self-regulate that, it's pretty much like a standards body. When you have a standard, then everyone sort of follows it because the market demands that. I think that's the way it'll have to go. I'm not a big fan of government regulation. I think government regulation should come if you can't self-regulate, right? Because they tend to be, most of the time, government doesn't have enough information, don't have enough of the experts, are too far away from the field. And so the regulation tends to be disruptive rather than constructive. Uh, that's been my experience. I think one reason why the Indian IT industry grew because regulatory cycles were annual, technology cycles were faster than annual. So they were regulating something that was history in a way. And otherwise, the IT industry in India would not have grown. I can tell you that in the
No, you're so right, sir. And so talking about the IT industry, and you are a pioneer in that. You co-founded HCL. So talk to our viewers a little bit about what that inspiration was when you co-founded HCL, how the journey went, and how are you leveraging those same experiences to coach youngsters, kids out of college for startups.
Yeah, so it was a very different world at that time. So all of us who started HCL were working in a company called DCM, Delhi Cloth and General Mills Company Limited. By revenue, they were the fourth or fifth largest private sector company in India. Multiple, they were conglomerate. Textiles was, of course, what everyone knows them for, but they were chemicals, fertilizers, rayon, tire cord, lots of food products, Rath Vanaspati, if you remember. The executive director, Dr. Vinay Malhotra, decided to get into electronics. It was seen as an emerging field. I was very lucky. I was one of the few electronics engineers in the company. I joined them as a senior management trainee in 1970 when I graduated. So I got, as I say, disproportionate responsibility. I was asked to head national sales 1 year out of college. And and we made electronic calculators. It was a rough period because there were companies coming up here in Silicon Valley who had chipsets, and you'd get a chipset, you'd design the machine or the motherboard, and then the company would go out of business. And so we went through a number of companies that way till we focused on a particular chipset. Made a calculator, got a large percentage of the market, uh, you know, sold electronic calculators, moved up to programmable calculators and we had set up a big R&D ourselves. Then we moved into computers. We made a 16-bit bit slice computer. But India was a socialist country in those days. And they had an act called the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, which didn't let large companies, private companies, get into any new area. And, if you ever worked in a large company, the legal department's job seems to be how to tell you not to do things. Okay. And so obviously they got advice. And look, in a 250 crore company, that's 2.5 billion rupees for people who don't understand crore. We were 1.72 crores. So we were 17.2 million. It didn't matter to them. And so they couldn't take a risk if we got the whole company into trouble. So they decided not to get into computers. Microprocessors were just coming out. And a number of us believed that microprocessors were going to change the world. So I think it was complete bravado. We didn't have the fact that there were six of us, we felt comfortable, everyone comforted everyone else. We had no money, no business plan. We just knew the market and we thought we understood the technology. And so we moved out and started a company where we thought initially we'll trade in calculators, which we understood, make some money and invest that in developing computers. That's how we did it. We were lucky. We had a television manufacturer come to us, Televista, and say he has calculators. He doesn't know how to sell them. He'll give us 90 days credit if we sold his calculators, which is how we made some money. And within 6 months or 3 months, we actually recruited some technical people and set up our own R&D, and made. Then we discovered that computer licenses were restricted to state and public sector only. And so we did what is called a joint sector agreement with the UP Electronics Corporation, which was a public sector unit, to set up what with HCL, it was called Hindustan Computers Limited at that time. That was what it was. It was just, we thought microprocessors were going to change the world, and they have actually in some ways.
Yeah. They have, yes.
Yeah. That was the motivation. I think I don't know how to describe this, but in a closed economy like India, we took out our first commercial computer. It was called the HCL HC at the same year and month in which Apple One was announced. We didn't find that out till later because we were obviously in a closed market, so to say. But yeah, and we had some very innovative technology with that product. India had a lot of power failures, and computers are difficult to recover from power failures. You need experienced programmers, JC. You need people to do a lot more work. And we didn't have that many experienced programmers. So what we did was we built a power shut-off auto restart into the logic of the computer and had a lead-acid truck battery that powered it. So when the power went off, the computer held all the registers at the point where the power went off. And when it came back, it started exactly where it stopped. So you didn't need experience programming to be able to do that. Yes, and we did that for most printers. Some of the dot matrix printers would lose a line of print, but that wasn't very important at that time because we recommended other printers to customers if they wanted. But yeah, that's how we did it, and that differentiated us in that market. And a lot of people who would not have bought computers uh, now could buy them and use them. And of course, then a few years later, things like mouse and video came in. And now I didn't even need, I could program an application, give it to them, and they could then, use it themselves. In fact, we ran an iconic campaign saying breaking the common computer myths. One of them was headlined that it's so simple, even a typist can operate. And I've had demonstrations in office where my sales guy has told the CEO, why the typist, even you can operate. But yeah, that was HCL. Yeah, we were innovating all the time. In fact, we were a global beta site for the 5.25-inch floppy from Sugar. Everyone was using 8-inch floppies. We were the first people to move to the 5.25-inch. We were the first people to use Winchester disk drives in our computers. Uh, you know, so we did a lot of risky, innovative things from a technology point of view, but most of them paid off. Not all, but most.
It's very interesting, sir. How you describe some of the emotion as the innovation as being very suitable for a country like India. So it was purpose built for the Indian market where power failures. Here's how you solve them. Whereas in many other countries, that is probably not something to solve for. But that is truly how innovation is self drives itself.
Yeah, and we didn't have UPSs and stuff. In fact, when we were selling 200 computers a year for a few years, and then we changed our strategy and sort of planned to sell 1,000 computers in the year. India had a problem. Where would I get 1,000 voltage stabilizers? Where would I get 1,000 air conditioners? We had those kinds of problems. So we had to build computers that didn't necessarily need either of those. And so our biggest issue when we used to install computers was checking that the earth was earthed properly. Otherwise, computers misbehave. And so a lot of times we had to go and do the earthing for companies or places where we were installing computers. But those were those days.
Those days, yeah. Very interesting. They're very interesting insights and stories. Arjun sir, so coming back to some of the educational institutions, right? You are on the board of several of those educational institutions, IIT Kharagpur and Shillong. How are you seeing the impact of AI on education sector or in general in technology on the education sector? What are some of these institutions doing?
So a lot of them, look, a lot of the IITs and NITs, colleges, engineering schools are putting in courses for AI. In fact, some of the private universities who don't have those details are working, they've outsourced it to people who can come in and teach that. And of course, they then charge extra, which, But yeah, you're seeing a major move towards it. In fact, a lot of companies, IT services companies, are telling their people that they've got to upskill themselves. Otherwise they may not be relevant. And so, whenever they're on the bench, a lot of people are running AI type programs for them, or getting them to understand what AI is. So you're going to see a large number of people come out. In fact, I think initially there'll be too many AI trained people without enough jobs. But it'll catch up over time. No, I just wanted to mention one more statistic. The All India Council of Technical Education, which really is the regulatory institution for engineering education, engineering and MBA, they had reduced, we were graduating 2.2 million or some number like that, engineers every year. They had reduced it to 1.6 or 1.7 because they felt there were too many people coming out who weren't getting jobs and it was frustrating. They have pushed it back to 2.2 with this AI thing. There are other things too, but AI being one of the large drivers to make that push back to that higher number and regulate those colleges. Yeah. So it is going to be big. And India, I think, is doing the right thing. They're trying to look for solutions. Yes, some of them are building platforms, but they're trying to look for vertical solutions in agriculture, in various things that they think would be effective. And they feel that is the way they may be able to overtake China.
That's an interesting model. Yeah. Yeah, because like you said earlier, NVIDIA is building vertical solutions, and that is their value proposition in terms of their valuation. So you're right. So let's talk about the future. You sort of had talked about it a little bit, but let's talk about the future. In the next, let's say decade or so, what are some of the emerging technologies that you are particularly very excited about, and two, what kind of business impact are they going to create?
So I think if you look at the next 10 years, I would say medicine, biogenetics, that's going to rule. That's going to change everything we do. Because now we're starting to get the tools. We're starting to understand, you're looking at, I'm talking to companies that, let's take cancer. So when you have to detect cancer, you do a biopsy to have a look, right? It's an intrusive thing. Biopsy, they have to go in, get a sample, then go to the pathology lab and have it looked at. There are companies that can, from the image that you take of the tumor, they'll be able to tell you whether it's malignant, not, whatever details you want at a higher accuracy, at least from the test that they're doing right now, then the pathologist can tell you. And so, it is then the other tests that you have today that tell you. So you're starting to see technology come in and start play a big role in the whole medical area. I would not have said 10 years earlier, but the pandemic has accelerated that because a lot of doctors, medical professionals are now accepting technology, which earlier their acceptance was much lower. That's happened in education too. It's happened in publishing. The pandemic made a lot of changes in some verticals that would have been slow to adapt to technology and the impact it would have. So I would say next 10 years, I would look at biotech, genetics, that area. If you went to 15 years, I would also look at nanotechnology, but that's coming up very strongly. It is still in its infancy. You're starting to see products. The body of the Dreamliner, the 787, is carbon fiber. Again, that's nano. You get some new sunblocks that have micro crystals, nano-sized crystals that reflect the sunlight back. That's how they become a sunblock. And so you're starting to see products come in. Now, I could be wrong, and I have been wrong in time predictions in the past. But I would love for it to come in much earlier. The only problem with nano is that they don't follow a Newtonian physics and math. They are different. And if you remember, Feynman had talked about it one time, that the science that nano follows seems to be different. And a lot of people will have to unlearn what they've learned and relearn, and that takes time.
Yeah. I mean, and then same thing for, let's say, quantum computing too, right? I recently saw the news on Google coming up with this chip.
I don't know how that. I always thought quantum needed close to absolute zero kind of temperatures. But if you've got a chip that can do it, I haven't read enough about it to know capability or whatever. But yeah, it would be an amazing breakthrough, and that would change the time frame, completely. In fact, I've got to mention an anecdote. Many years ago, I was flying from London to Boston, and there was a VP from Digital Equipment Corporation. I don't know how many people remember DEC sitting next to me. And that was the time they had to make the transition from VAC to Unix. And Digital was having, in fact, the company really closed down because they didn't really do that well. And they were having a tough time doing it. And so he mentioned something to me. He said, how was God able to create the world in 6 days? He said the only reason he could do it is because he didn't have an installed base.
Yeah. It's easier to start from scratch rather than, all these in the tech world to talk about migration and seamless migration, user experience should not be impacted, all of that stuff, right? Just makes it overly complicated.
Absolutely. And, you saw that with mobile cell phones in the US. They were probably one of the last few countries to adopt it. And how India adopted it so quickly because they didn't have the landline infrastructure.
Right. Yeah. We sort of leapfrogged, right? We didn't have anything in India in between. India just leapfrogged. No, wonderful. Sir, so talking about India a little bit, the Indian ecosystem is obviously growing up, right? And there are a lot of unicorns that are coming out of the Indian ecosystem. How do you see that playing? There's a government, of course, Indian government, Indian politics keeps changing all the time. Then there is all these newer generations who are coming in who are taking the West. There's a lot of Western influence as well. funding also coming in. So how do you see that landscape emerge in the next decade?
So, one of the problems India has is their market for electronics goods is growing so quickly, but they have no real component manufacturing in India. And our import bill on electronic components will exceed our import bill on oil in 4, 5 years, 6 years, some period. And unless they can start getting component manufacturing in India, it's going to be the next big problem that a country like India would have. And so right now the government is aware of that. They put out some very aggressive plans in terms of support that they will give at the central level and at a state level. And you must have been reading, if you read the Indian press, about how Tata's, HCL, number of people are collaborating to set up fabs, but not really fabs, but do composites, do packaging, do stuff that ultimately will go into becoming a fab. And how the government is looking at it somewhat holistically. They've got DLIs, design-linked incentives, production-linked incentives, and they're also looking at funding universities to do VLSI training, and so the whole idea, and how to send engineers abroad so they work in a fab. So when they come back, they know how to. Today, if someone sets up a fab, I don't know how to run it. I don't have that expertise. So they are working quite aggressively with that, and also what with the anti-China supply chain feeling right now, and the fact that Taiwan feels threatened and they want a lot of their industries to relocate elsewhere too. I mean, India is at a good place to start doing that. And it's what we are working, actually, another HCL co-founder, Ajay Chaudhary, and I had set up a not-for-profit foundation called Epic Foundation, where the only way you'll get components into India is if you make products that are relevant to India that have volume. And, we have education, tablets, you have power meters, electronic power meters, you have LED controllers. There are lots of things that have high volume in it. And so we're trying to build them, fund people who are willing to design them and manufacture them and sell them, so that hopefully, like our IT services have become global brands, we at some stage would like our hardware brands to become global. And so that's the challenge I see for India. I'm not going to be around and they're able to do it, but they've got to focus on it and get it done.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I certainly hope that you are around, sir, because, you're such a visionary. The world will benefit significantly from the kind of vision that you have. But having said that, the Make in India initiative, that seems to be certainly catching up. There's a lot of new investments that are coming in, and sincerely hope that India is able to become the hardware capital of the world, as it is the IT services capital of the world. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, you alluded to that earlier about medicine. So you have been involved with the Map My Genome initiative, right? So talk to our viewers about some of the learnings that you have had with that initiative, and the impact it will have in telemedicine, especially a lot of remote parts, and not just in India, but many emerging countries, or the other parts of the world, in Africa, in many other parts of the world, the remote places where people don't have access to medicine. And telemedicine has shown during COVID times it's going to have an impact. So talk to our viewers a little bit about that.
Yeah. So first thing is, a lot of what our standards today are, when the doctor looks at your blood test and says you're within range or you're out of range or whatever, come from something that was done in 1948, they call the Framingham experiment. And it was done on Caucasians. So a lot of that standards are from a Caucasian database. People today accept that the Indian physiology and the Chinese physiology are different to that. And so our standards should be different. Right. Now, we've got to collect a database, do some work before we come up with our standards. And one thing I know, because I got involved in that, in India, unless your fasting blood sugar is above 120, you're considered okay. In the US, that is 100. And I've always been 105, 102, 108. It sometimes drops below 100, but that's the normal fasting blood sugar when I do my blood test. And the doctors here have been telling me for 30 years that you're a potential diabetic. No one's had diabetes in my family. I think now they've sort of accepted that that's your norm and you're okay. But that's the difference that you see. And I think when you talk of people like Map My Genome, what they're trying to do is build a genomic database of Indians from which they can try and predict heart attacks, diabetes, some of the chronic illnesses, right? And that's what they do. They have a number of products that do that. They also have a product that actually tells you which medicines you're could be allergic to, and which ones would have a better impact on you, etc., etc. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, can be done in genomics, that Map My Genome and a couple of other companies in India also to some extent. So that was one part of what you asked. Uh, just repeat the second part of that question that you.
Second part was around telemedicine. And how do you
Okay.
see the
Yes.
impact of telemedicine?
Yes. So again, we started telemedicine in India basically with the model that there is a shortage of doctors. And that's the problem, because big hospitals like AIMS, Patna, All India, or King George Medical University now in Lucknow, which is a 5,000 bed hospital, has 10,000 OPDs every day. They can only give you 2,000 hours of doctor time for telemedicine. So telemedicine can only have limited reach if you have limited doctor time. So what we had done in this particular company, Evolco, is use the large database of patients whose records we had, some 9 million plus, and built a diagnostic software that helps the doctors diagnose. So when you go in, they take your vitals, and then you say, I've got a stomach ache. The system will ask you questions, you answer in multiple languages. And when it finishes asking you questions, it'll make a diagnostic and send it to the doctor. And we are seeing that it's saving doctors in India 30 to 50% of their time. Right. And as doctors disagree with our diagnosis, through ML, that AI system will actually learn more and come back more. And we are seeing traction with that in the US too. Not for the same thing, for a different reason. It helps doctors make care plans and stuff like that. But yeah, it is, that's the way it's got to go. There's a paper published by the director of AIMS Patna, where he talks about 80,000 consults that they did remotely, out of which he estimates he saved 50,000 visits to the hospital, right? And then he goes on to estimate that each visit to Patna would cost 2,000 rupees, because the patient would come with an attendant, stay a night in Patna, right? So if I multiply 2,000 by 50,000, you get to 10 crores. Now to think that you saved rural, I'm assuming poor people, that much money, and it was just that time we had 40 odd remote locations from where we were doing this. Ideally, we need 1,500 just in those districts in Patna. Now, obviously, the hospital doesn't have the bandwidth to handle that. So, yeah, it's an interesting field. A lot of work has to be done.
Yeah, a lot of work.
Yeah, at least in countries where there's a doctor shortage, and that'll be most of the so-called developing world.
Right. And so I'm just thinking aloud as you were talking that perhaps this necessitates another course, something like a doctor, somebody who's familiar with that whole medicine ecosystem, and at the same time able to provide a level 0 or a level 1 type support for all the telemedicine, right? All the machine learning algorithms that come up, they're able to make some recommendations, and then finally it goes to the doctor. So that way the doctors are able to save more time and focus on truly where they're needed.
So you're right. You hit the nail on the head. The model that worked in India was that all the remote locations came to a nurse practitioner, who then took the call and decided which department it should go to, whether it's to orthopedics or gynecology or wherever. And most of the hospitals were medical college is associated with them. And so invariably the medical student would take the call in the department and then give it to the doctor.
Interesting.
Right?
Interesting. Yeah.
And the hierarchy was, it came from from a community health center. From a public health center to a community health center to a district hospital, and then to a specialized hospital if it needed that kind. So it depends on what you needed and where the real shortage was. The real shortage is in specialists. And so that's sort of how the whole thing works. Though I've got to say that everyone in that line is overworked. So you want to help everyone in some form or the other.
Right, right. I mean, COVID certainly exposed that all the doctors and people in the medical practice were overworked. But yeah, this was like an open secret at some point of time. So, have you heard of a company called Sigtuple? Sigtuple.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so they are the founder of this company, Dr. Tathagato. He's also from the same college as you and me, IIT Kharagpur, and he is my batch.
Oh, then I
And
think I know him. I know
yeah,
Tata.
yes,
How that you give the name?
yes.
I didn't know the name of the.
Microscopy. Yeah, microscopy. They are into robotics microscopy, where they're including AI and robotics to actually create microscopy, which can be, and they have all these machine learning algorithms which can look at a digital image and predict what kind of problems it has instead of actual doctors doing it. And they're saving tons of money for very people living in remote parts of the country, as well as time for the doctors.
Yeah, now that you mention IIT Kharagpur, Professor Suman Chakravarti there is doing some human work in terms of getting diagnostics for rural areas. In fact, I know he's even starting to work on a low-cost MRI machine that he can take into rural areas, a portable MRI machine, which is high resolution, in Teslas, and take it to rural areas. So that group at IIT Kharagpur is doing some amazing work. I know IIT Bombay is doing some work with a NGO called Antara Foundation that addresses infant mortality, maternal health, and malnutrition, and working with them to see how they can improve the metrics in all those areas. So I know the IITs are getting into it. They've been asked, the old IITs that have land have been asked to become full universities. So, Kharagpur has now a medical college. They have a law college. And when I was there were 2,500 students. Now there's 17,500 going to 25,000. So, yeah, it's certainly becoming a huge campus.
So from your time to my time in 2000, the numbers have not changed significantly. I graduated in 2000, and the numbers, if I'm right, were still about 2000, maybe 700, or maybe 3000. So the numbers did not change. It's only after that it went up
Yeah,
exponentially.
it's only recently,
Yeah,
last
yeah.
4 or 5 years, that they've been asked to become, or maybe a little more. But yeah, the numbers have only gone up. And in
And
fact, the pace of infrastructure is slower than the recruitment speed. So when I went there last, there were 3 people to a room, but because the building had come up, But what's also nice to see is, I don't know, in your time, in our time, we probably had 50 girls and 2,500 boys. Now, approximately 18% are women, and the ratio they are targeting to go up to 30%.
and those are extremely important because that brings the diversity that we are talking about, right? And so the other point that you make, right, all these the doctors and the kind of innovation that's happening in the telemedicine world or in the medical equipment world, meant for rural people, poor people who don't have access to facilities. And I think that's one way of that India has been thinking about Vishwamitra, right, becoming a friend of the world, because a lot of people in the world who actually need these technologies, and that innovation has to come from somewhere, right? And it can only come from a country like India, which has access to technology and talent, at the same time understand these problems truly, truly profoundly.
And have a lot more experience than most people.
Yeah.
Because our
Yes.
doctors
Yes.
see more patients than, yeah. And, I think if you remember iFlex, the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
banking software that actually Oracle bought. And so, I remember I tried selling banking software from Hogan, from Kapiti, from lots of people to even big banks like State Bank. Just wasn't a fit for them. And then iFlex came in and built something that was relevant for banks in India and is relevant for banks in developing countries all over the world compared to what the US had at that time as a product. Of course, now a number of people make banking software that is relevant, but iFlex was the first one. And I think what you're saying is the model is very similar. In healthcare, it'll come out exactly the same way. We'll come out with products that are cost effective, efficient, both intrusive as well as non-intrusive. And yes, I agree. That is where I think we can take the lead on products, not just services worldwide.
Yeah. Yeah. So one final question in that current segment. So what are some of the advancements in AI that you see and you're very excited about in the next 5-10 years?
So I think voice is one of the big ones, right? I think e-workers, if I use that term, that could come in and do my mundane tasks, which are repetitive. If what is happening is I end up spending at least 2 hours, maybe 3 hours a day on my email. right? A lot of it is people mark copies where you don't have very much to do, but because you were somewhere in the chain, they do a reply all, and the problem is you have to look at it, delete it. That takes time. If I could train AI bot to actually, like you train drag and dictate for voice, so you'll get text from that voice. If I could train a AI assistant to take care of some of those things, that would save me at least an hour out of my 3 hours I spent, maybe more. And so I think things like that are going to become really efficient. And of course, I think it's going to make a big difference in medical. AI, for example, let's take X-rays. If you can feed a million X-rays and their results to an AI system, then you give it a new X-ray. It'll actually point out 5 or 6 areas where you should look at for possible problems. Right. A great radiologist can carry probably 10,000 X-ray models in his head. Computer AI system can take millions. And so they're likely to be far more efficient in pointing out areas. I don't think, right now, I think doctors would disagree that they will actually do the diagnostics, but at some point they will, right? That's how, just simple thing where images are being analyzed. They'd be far more efficient. So I think you're going to see a lot of these areas where AI will come in and play a very effective role. As we see more applications develop on AI, you're already seeing art, you're already seeing music. You'll see a lot more coming out from this. The applications have to come in. And I am hoping we look at not just things like art and music, but agriculture, where lots more people get impacted. Healthcare, education, agriculture, in those areas. Education already it's making a difference. It can predict based on how I'm doing a test what I should be doing. It'll become a great teacher's assistant. And I think we'll finally get to the model where teachers should spend time with students who need the help, not with students who don't need the help. If I'm good at math and I'm doing well, why should the teacher spend time with me? They can pat me on the back, that's funny. But she should spend time with the kids who are having trouble with math in that grade. And, and I think AI will give her the pointers to be able to do that and tell her in which areas she should try and help them.
So that's a very interesting thing, sir, that you said. So when I think about this at a very high level, right, the way I see it is there are certain things where we are really good at. Can we become better? Of course, we can become better. Can we, for example, have a month-end closing or a year closing for a company from 3 days to, let's say, 3 seconds? Absolutely, we can, right, with the help of AI. And then there are all of these things that what we call the have-nots, where people don't have access to medicine, people don't have access to food, or impoverished. So whether AI should be focused on reducing the 3-day closing to 3 seconds, or should AI be focused on solving some of the larger world problems where humanity as such is impacted? And I think that probably is a no-brainer. I think that's where the sharpest minds in the world should focus on, this latter part rather than the first part. But again, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, life doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
As long as there's a materialistic instinct, people want to go where they can make money and then get to those material things. You have to reach a level of nirvana to what you're saying. And so we will have to depend on some foundations and NGOs, because what does happen is once people get to a particular financial level, suddenly they realize that that's not what creates true happiness. And they suddenly need to look at other alternatives. And helping people, making people happy, doing those things tends to be, meditation. That's what, and so you'll see it happen, but it won't happen in the first generation. It'll happen with foundations of people who already created money and, left stuff.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, yeah. All right. So that brings us to the end of our show, and then the final round, which is called the rapid fire round. So let's get started. So my first question to you, sir, is ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Meta Llama, Claude, and anything else that you can think of. If you could use one for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Right now, it's the Google one.
Gemini.
Yeah.
Okay. My second question is, what is the most overrated AI trend right now?
I think the hype that it's going to come immediately and have an immediate impact. I think that's the trend that I disagree with. It'll have an impact, but not immediate.
You are right. I mean, somebody just reminded me the other day that ChatGPT has been in existence for 2 years. It seems like yesterday, but it's been 2 years now, right? The third one is how do you define the future of AI in your field?
So my field is IT services. In that's the area I've spent the last so many years. I think we are talking of automated programming as one of the big areas that's going to come in. I think yes, but I think more importantly, AI will be a much better tool to tell me my errors in programming. It will do automated programming, but it may not be the most efficient in the world, at least initially. But initially, it can tell me my errors. And I know a number of people who are working on that, looking at different kind of things that people write code in Python and, different things, and giving errors in that code so that you don't discover it later. You try and catch it very early. So that's Kubernetes, whatever people are writing code of.
Yeah. All right. The next one I have is, what is one AI skill that everyone should learn today to be better prepared for tomorrow?
How to work with, I would say prompt engineering, if I have to give one. How to ask a question to an AI platform that will give you an answer in the first shot. You don't have to go through multiple. Today, everyone's going through at least 2 or 3 rounds of asking the question and then amending it to get what they want from the system, from the platform. I think that, and it's becoming a topic colleges are starting to teach, prompt engineering.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last one, if AI could take over one of your daily tasks completely, what would it be? And I think you sort of answered that, the email.
Yes, it would take, if you can get me 1 hour less in front of my email, I can spend 1 hour more on other things.
So thank you, Arjun, sir. That brings us to the end of the show. This has been such a fascinating conversation and so insightful. So truly appreciate your time.
Not at all. Thank you very much.